This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
What's up, fam? It's sports journalist Ari Chambers.
Hey, what's up, y'all? It's your girl, Sam J.
And we're the hosts of Everyone Watches Women's Sports, a new podcast from Together.
We're breaking down the biggest headlines, the viral moments, and the stories everyone's talking about across women's sports.
From game-changing performances to culture-shifting conversations, we'll give you our takes, our debates, and a few laughs along the way.
Because everyone watches women's sports. Listen to Everyone Watches Women's Sports
on the iHeartRadio app,
Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Joy is essential, and it's also elusive. But now, there's a new and exciting way to start your journey toward a more joyful existence. Joy 101. It's a new podcast hosted by me, Hoda Kotb. If you're craving inspiration to maximize your joy, tune into these candid, uplifting, and moving on-air chats. Open your free iHeartRadio app, search Joy 101, and listen now. Joy 101 with Hoda Kotb is presented by CVS.
My first guest is Paris Hilton, Shakira, Luke, and Yerin. Have surprises?
Many surprises.
Welcome to the Sweet 305 podcast, where the group chat comes to life.
What up? You're the only person I know that loves a yellow Starburst. It's lemonade.
This is Sweet 305. Here, oversharing is encouraged. Listen to Sweet 305 with Lele Pons on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey everyone, it's the Jonas Brothers. This week on the podcast, Hey Jonas, we're hanging out with Michael Bublé. After Kevin's recent interesting confession about Michael, we figured there's only one thing to do. We must invite Michael Bublé on the podcast, and we want to know what's on his Sexy Time playlist.
You know, I did an interview, and they're like, have you heard about this Jonas Brothers thing? And they're like, what did you think of it? And I was like, well, I mean, it's reciprocal.
We talk about Kevin's confession, Michael's reaction, and a whole lot more. Our conversation with Michael Bublé is out now. Listen to Hey Jonas on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
You've reached American History Hotline. You ask the questions, we get the answers. Leave a message.
Hey there, American History Hotliners. Bob Crawford here. Thrilled to be joining you again for another episode of American History Hotline, the show where you ask the questions and I get you the answers. And the best way to get us a question is to record a video or a voice memo on your phone and email it to AmericanHistoryHotline@gmail.com. That's AmericanHistoryHotline@gmail.com. All right, enough of a preamble. Let's get to today's question. It's a great one. And with a good question, a question this good, we had to bring in the big guns. Here to help me answer it is, and I'm going to say this man is an institution, Peter Sagal, host of NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, and the PBS show Constitution USA.
Hey, and I want to say nice little, setup there by using preamble there in your introduction. Got us in the constitutional mood.
This show has great writers.
We're all dependent on them.
Okay, Peter, let's get to the show. Of course, it's just an honor to have you today. Here's the question we were hoping you could help us answer.
Hi, Bob. This is Kathy from West Olive. I'm really enjoying the podcast so far. Thanks for doing it. I'd love to hear you talk about the Electoral College, how it came to be, what the thoughts were behind its coming to be, and whether or not it still serves us well. There seems to be a lot of debate surrounding the Electoral College and whether we should still be using that or going to a straight popular vote. I'd really love to hear whatever expert you might ask to come on, talk about it and break it down for us too. Thanks again for all you're doing. Really enjoy the show.
So I love these questions, Kathy, and I'm glad you're enjoying the show. What is your reaction to those questions first, Peter? I just gotta get your initial reactions.
They're very good questions. In fact, they're questions that have been asked about the Electoral College and our Constitution pretty much. I was about to say the day it was ratified, but before that, even before it was ratified, people were like, what the hell is this? And I'll note that although the U.S. Constitution, the longest surviving so far written constitution in the Western democratic world, has inspired countless other movements and countries to establish their own democracies, not one of them have adopted anything like our Electoral College. You know how they say that you may have heard that the national parks were America's best idea, the Electoral College pretty much America's worst idea.
For those who don't know, and I'm going to, we just probably everybody knows, but just for if there's someone out there who doesn't know what the Electoral College is, what is it?
Okay, the Electoral College is, as I said, a unique system that our framers back in Philadelphia, when they created the Constitution in 1787, decided they would use exclusively to elect the president. In the rest of the document, they called for popular election of, say, representatives. The senators in the upper house were supposed to be elected by legislators. That was later changed by constitutional amendment. So they didn't have a problem with popular elections for other offices, but they decided that for the role of the president, they wanted to do something unique and special for a variety of reasons. And the way it works is every state gets a number of electors, officers, equal to the number of representatives they have in Congress. That means one for every member of the House of Representatives plus two, one for each senator. So, for example, if a state happens to have 5 congressmen or representatives, congressmen back then, only men did it, and 2 senators, that state would have 7 electoral votes. And then, as the system was designed, the way it works is each state can elect however they wanted their electors. They could choose them any way they wanted. They could appoint them by legislature, which I think one state did, but most of them from the very beginning did popular elections. They could elect these electors, and then these electors would, in their wisdom, cast the votes for president. And the initial idea was that these electors would be wise men, worldly men, knowledgeable men, chosen by the people of a state to represent their interests. Right. So if that hypothetical state had 7 electors, those 7 electors would stroke their chins, probably their beards, depending on the time, and they would decide which of the candidates for president was best. Now, very quickly, that's not how it worked at all. Instead, what happened is the system we now have, where there's one slate of electors for each presidential candidate, right? So if, again, our hypothetical state, the popular vote goes for candidate X as opposed to candidate Y, then the candidate X's electors get to cast their votes. And of course, all of them go for candidate X. They were elected. They said, vote for me. I will vote for candidate X. And that's the way it's pretty much played out. They changed, they fiddled with the system a little bit with the 12th Amendment, but basically that's how it's been playing out pretty much since our founding in the very first presidential election.
So getting back to the founders, at the time you got big states and small states, free states and slave states. Who was pushing the most for the Electoral College?
The Electoral College was pushed for primarily by small states and slave states. And the reasons make a little sense if you consider it from their perspective. The first thing you need to do is you need to remember, this is something that was impressed upon me by Akil Reed Amar, professor at Yale, world-renowned expert in the U.S. Constitution, who was our sort of in-house expert on our TV show, Constitution USA, for PBS. It's impossible for us now to comprehend how big America was, even just the 13 coastal colonies. It was a continent, the Continental Congress. This was a time, of course, when there was no electronic communication. Messages went as fast as a horse or a ship could take them. If you lived in, say, Massachusetts, Virginia was an impossible distance away. It would take months to get there. You would probably never, ever go or even meet somebody from there. And the states were very, very different. They had different populations, different kinds of industry, different kinds of agriculture. The agriculture in Massachusetts, for example, very different than in Virginia. They had different, sort of ethos. For example, everybody knows Massachusetts was founded by Puritans. Well, Rhode Island, next door, was founded by people who couldn't stand the goddamn Puritans and wanted to get away from them. And Pennsylvania was founded by William Penn as a kind of free-thinking, utopia where everybody could live in peace. And The southern states, Virginia, Georgia, the Carolinas, were agrarian and, of course, slave colonies. So they had very, very different perspectives. So the Electoral College had three purposes, one of which was due to that distance, that vastness, that continental scale of our new country. The idea being that there is no way in the world, even a literate man in Massachusetts, and that, remember, was more or less a requirement to vote, you had to be a white man who owned property, would have any idea who the principal candidates for president were. They just wouldn't know. Your average, I think as they used to say, yeoman on the land, wouldn't have any idea who these people were. So how could you trust this person to make a wise choice? Elect these Solons, these educated people, these statesmen who would know, and they'll cast a wiser vote. And there was some legitimacy to that. One thing that the founders completely miffed, they did not understand at all, was that the system they were creating would instantly call into being political parties. They didn't realize that. They didn't want political parties. They got them because the system they created gave all the power of any given office or government to whoever has 50 votes plus one. So all of a sudden, people started clumping together into interest groups to get to 50 plus one, and instantly we had political parties. We've always had, more or less, two political parties in this country under different names, standing for different things. But that happened quickly, and so obviously, you didn't need to know who the candidate was if you were a Democratic voter, Democratic Party, or a Federalist Party, or the Democratic Republicans, as they were called. You just voted for your candidate. So that became, shall we say, irrelevant pretty quickly. The second reason was all the states had their own election rules, right? Some states might, some states had property requirements and they varied. If you gave the states the popular vote, a big state like, say, Pennsylvania could say, oh, by the way, women can vote. And all of a sudden, their voting population would double. And thus, they would have an even greater influence over who got to be president. So by telling states, yeah, you can run elections however you want, but what you're going to be doing is electing a certain number of electors, they managed to make that irrelevant, right? Any state could do anything it wanted to elect those, in our example state, 7 electors. Final reason, and this is why it carried the day, and this is why it ended up being such a terrible thing for this country, at least for the first 10 years, is the slave states knew that they would be outnumbered in every way by the free states. One thing people may not know is how broad slavery was in the early years of our republic. For example, Virginia, at the time of the ratification of the Constitution, had about 400,000 people living in it, free people, and about 300,000 enslaved people. That's a lot. And that raises a lot of questions, but the important thing to know is that they knew that they could not compete in a fair fight electorally with the free states. They just didn't have the numbers of free people that, say, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania did, New York State. There is a thing in the Constitution called the 3/5 Clause, sometimes referred to as the 3/5 Compromise, which makes me crazy. And sometimes you'll hear about it that, it was a compromise, you see, because the slave states wanted all of their enslaved people to be counted for political representation, right? So you count them and then you get representatives in Congress based on that population as well. And of course, the free states wanted them not to be counted at all on the basic idea that, well, what do you mean they count? They're not going to count. They don't get to vote. They have no civil rights. Why should they be included in any way in this democracy that we are also completely excluding them from by denying them any human rights at all? But because the free states knew that if they didn't accommodate the slave states, there would be no Constitution, there would be no United States, they let it go. And they, quote unquote, compromised, meaning that a enslaved person would count as 3/5 of a free person in counting up population for representation, right? So that means, my math is bad, but of those 300,000 enslaved people in Virginia, 3/5 of them got counted toward representation, meaning Virginia got extra members of Congress, even though they weren't even though the numbers of people who were voting for them didn't change, right? Because slaves couldn't vote. And that meant that they got extra electoral votes, right?
So when you think of, and this was actually in a congressional argument I was reading in the early years of our nation, Georgia congressman saying that the enslaved population were the machinery of the South.
Right.
So the machinery got the votes.
Machinery got the votes, yes.
But in the North, people like Gouverneur Morris would argue during the Constitutional Convention that, hey, the furniture doesn't get the vote,
right?
Essentially.
Or, yeah, the quote I was just reading as I was refreshing myself, he says something about like, we're not counting our cows for representation. Why do you get to count these people you are treating as cattle? But the Southern argument...
Why 3/5, Peter? I'm sorry to interrupt, but why 3/5?
What was weird was I was reading about it, and apparently there wasn't a huge debate about it, at least not as reflected in the records of the Constitutional Convention. Basically, one representative, I think it was George Mason from Virginia, there's a college named for him, said, okay, how about if we just count him as 3/5? Does that work for everybody? Okay, good. Yes, great. And it just...
Because no one wants to do math.
No one wants to do math, and more to the point, nobody wants to really talk about it. There's this amazing evasion in the Constitution of the issue of slavery. Slavery is implicitly endorsed 3 times in the Constitution. One or rather it's mentioned, and sort of mentioned in a way like, yeah, we have slavery. One was the 3/5 clause. Another was the fugitive slave clause. And the third was a clause saying that international slave trade and importation of slaves would end by a certain date, 1805, I think. So the Constitution, in a weird way, endorsed, allowed, accepted the existence of slavery, but it never mentions the word slavery. It does not say enslaved people. It says people held to service. And that really reflects their great, contradiction, that they knew they were creating a government based explicitly on ideas of inherent human rights. And they were doing it while at the same time condemning hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people even at that time, and God knows how many in terms of their future generations, to a condition of, as we have already said, that's akin to cattle with no human rights, people who could be sold, bought, worked to death, tortured, raped, anything you wanted to do to them. And they created this country which had these astonishing ideals and this astonishing evil and a contradiction to every one of those ideals at the same time. And the way they dealt with that contradiction is they simply didn't talk about it.
So, Peter, when I do the math, I think about there were consequences to that compromise, if they want to call it a compromise. The South won, right? They got the better end of the deal because, of course, Washington's Washington. You can almost exclude him, but then you get Adams. Okay, that's Massachusetts.
Right.
Then you get Jefferson, Virginia, Madison, Virginia, Monroe, Virginia. You get Quincy Adams. Then you get Tennessee. You get Van Buren in New York, but he's really, the northern men with Southern ideals, right? Yep. So it seems like, and I think William Freeling, the great historian William Freeling, in The Road to Disunion, he talks about 36 of the 32 of the first 36 years of the nation we're dominated by the South.
Yep.
Not only by presidents, but Supreme Court justices, by secretaries of state, by all the positions that matter the most. The South dominated.
Exactly, and it's all because of not all. They also had a lot of wealth and a lot of power based on slavery, but structurally, it was due to the combination of the Electoral College, which gave each state votes in the same number as their representatives, and the 3/5 clause, which gave the slave power more representation, more electoral votes. Basically, every president until Lincoln was either a slave owner themselves or sympathetic to slavery, with 2 exceptions, both named Adams. and neither of them, by the way, did anything to interfere with it, because that would have been the end of their political career. If you read any history of the first century of the United States, from founding to the Civil War, you realize that slavery was the most important topic, the most important issue, whether it would be extended, whether it would be banned, whether it would be abolished, whether it would flourish. It dominated every political debate, and rightfully so, because it was this monstrosity that some people relied on as the basis of their wealth and their entire culture, and other people saw as the vast evil that it was. Of course, it was going to be the main subject of discussion and debate. And by the way, one other thing that the 3/5 clause did was it created a really good incentive to acquire more enslaved people, right? More of them you had, more you get enough of them, you can get another congressman out of it. And so it just created a situation where slavery became not just the basis of economic power in the South, to a degree that we don't really appreciate now, that the entire system was based on slave labor, but also created, it also gave them their political power. It was a win-win-win from their evil perspective.
What's up, fam? I'm sports journalist Ari Chambers.
Hey, what's up, y'all? It's your girl, Sam J.
And we're the hosts of Everyone Watches Women's Sports, a new podcast from Together and iHeart Women's Sports.
Because let's be real, women's sports is giving us way too much to talk about these days.
The highlights, the rivalries, the breakout stars, the moments that take over your entire timeline.
And the conversations that start during the game and somehow keep going all week.
Every week, we're breaking down the biggest stories across women's sports.
We'll give you our takes, our debates, and probably a few disagreements.
We'll talk to athletes, celebrate big moments, and get into what's happening on and off the field, court, track, and beyond.
Because we're not just interested in what happened, we're interested in why everyone's talking about it. Because everyone watches women's sports. So if you're already a fan,
or you're just getting into the game, there's a seat for you right here.
Listen to Everyone Watches Women's Sports
on the iHeartRadio app,
Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, I'm Hoda Kotb, host of the podcast Joy 101 with Hoda Kotb. Okay, if you know me, you know this. I'm always searching for inspiration, for support, and useful tools to help maximize joy. So this podcast lets us uncover all of that together. We're going to have these meaningful conversations with the world's most fascinating people, like when actress Olivia Munn shared how she overcame fierce health challenges that she never saw coming.
I've gone through breast cancer and then helped my mother through breast cancer, and that was more difficult. There's a lot of people who understand postpartum depression. I was not prepared for postpartum anxiety.
Olympic champ Shawn Johnson revealed why she had no choice but to be a gymnast.
There was something about gymnastics that was intoxicating to me. It's given me a belief that we all have one of those treasures inside of us. We just have to find it.
Listen to Joy 101 with Hoda Kotb on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
My first guest is Paris Hilton, Shakira, Luke and Yerin, Samira y Gracie. I'm so excited.
On the bouncy bed.
You have surprises?
Many surprises.
Welcome to Suite 305, where the group chat comes to life. What up? Es como que una forma de decir como, hola amiga, hola mejor amiga, hola hermana, what up?
Mira, nunca lo había hablado con nadie. Excepto con mis hijos. Mis hijos sí saben. Yes.
Sé mi amante.
Uf. Punch. Qué increíble. Ya la telenovela.
You're the only person I know that loves a yellow starburst. It's lemonade.
No hay alguien que te falta, como que tú dices, me gustaría colaborar con esta persona. This is Suite 305. Listen to Suite 305 with Lele Pons as part of My Cultura podcast network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Jake Brennan, and on my podcast, Disgraceland, I tell the stories behind music's biggest names, the moments, rumors, and real-life events that help shape their legacy. Like the story behind Sonic Youth that starts with downtown New York cool and ends with album art inspired by a true crime. Sonic Youth was not fronted by a groupie hustling alpha like David Lee Roth. No, Sonic Youth's Thurston Moore was an artist in love with a fellow artist who just happened to play bass in the same band with him and his other artist friends. Her name was Kim Gordon, and Thurston and Kim were every bit as cool as the couple on the cover of Goo. The same couple involved in one of the UK's darkest true crimes. Disgraceland is part of the Exactly Right Network. Listen to new episodes every Tuesday, bonus episodes Thursday, and rewinds on Sunday on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is American History Hotline. I'm your host, Bob Crawford. Today, my guest is Peter Sagal, host of NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, a fellow historian as well. You might remember his PBS show of a few years back, Constitution USA. We're talking about the 538 votes that actually matter in American presidential elections. That's right, the Electoral College. Remember to send us your burning questions about American history. Record yourself using the voice memo app on your phone and email it to americanhistoryhotline@gmail.com. You can also send us your thoughts on the Electoral College. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you kind of like it, but you're waiting for it to text you first so you don't seem desperate? All right, James. Peter, I don't read these before I read.
I understand. Yeah, they just put it in front of you.
Send your musings to americanhistoryhotline@gmail.com. Now back to the show. All right, Peter. So looking at recent headlines in Texas, they are going to do something to give themselves more political power,
yes.
The Republican Party. You know, when I think it's hard to not live in the historical sense of this, being that what we talked about last block, every time new territory was acquired and brought into the Union, it sparked another debate that was about the Electoral College, right? Would this land be slave? Would this land be free? Always conflict. There were Northern politicians who wanted free land, not because they were compassionate towards the enslaved and wanted emancipation. No, because they wanted political power. This is all about power. So right now in Texas, they are redrawing, or by the time this airs, redrew the districts to give the Republican Party more seats friendly to themselves. So talk about these districts.
Sure.
And how they are allocated and drawn. And when do we typically draw them?
This is, I should say, by the way, that this is a different issue. This is the issue of gerrymandering, which usually applies to congressional districts or state legislature districts. And gerrymandering is a very old phenomenon in America, as evidenced by the fact that it was named for Elbridge Gerry, who was actually at the Constitutional Convention before going on to become governor of Massachusetts. He drew a congressional map that had a district that was so weird looking, it looked like a salamander, and it was called the gerrymander or the gerrymander, and thus we have it. Now, what's going on with that is a very different issue. Remember, Electoral College votes are given to whoever wins a statewide election. So just like governor or senator, it's a statewide race. And so the issue of districts within a state is irrelevant. But this issue it's one of those things, one of the many things we've discovered in the last 10 years, where we find out that what we thought were rules were only guidelines, to quote Pirates of the Caribbean. So the guideline, the practice was every 10 years, as called for in the Constitution, there would be a new census. And after the census, when we knew what the new population was of persons, by the way, not citizens, I should say that, the Constitution says persons, you would redraw the districts. And over the years, over the decades, as political parties, as I said, first sprang into being and then became more and more powerful, those people realized that they could district to their advantage. And that's gotten much, much worse in recent years, decades, for two reasons. First of all, computers. You could say, for example, that Chicago, where I live, is a Democratic town. We always knew that. The vote of Chicago would go to the Democratic candidate. Now with computers, you can find out which blocks went for, which houses practically went for Democrats. So if you were to if you wanted to draw a map that you could guarantee would maximize the number of Democratic voters, as we have done, in fact, to a great extent here in Illinois, you can do it. You can do it with these computers and these mapping softwares. And the Roberts Supreme Court has weighed in on this, bless their heart. And what they have said is that you can't draw districts to deprive people of equal weight as voters because of their race. Racial gerrymanders are illegal, but partisan gerrymanders are fine, according to the Roberts Supreme Court, right? So all a state has to do, and this has happened many times, to justify a gerrymander that, say, cuts up a significant black population in order to dilute their vote so they can't vote for the person that population would want to represent their particular interests, and say, oh, no, it's not a racial gerrymander. It's a partisan gerrymander. Those black people, they just vote for Democrats. We're not screwing them over because they're black. No, we're screwing them over because they're Democrats. And according to the Roberts Court, that's totally fine. Now, state courts have, over the last few years, intervened because state constitutions have their own provisions about the right to vote. Although that's gotten to be a battlefield as well. There's actually an interesting case that's parallel, the states of Wisconsin and North Carolina. In the state of Wisconsin, a map passed by the Republican legislature, a supermajority, imposed a Republican-favored gerrymander on the state of Wisconsin. However, the people of Wisconsin got together and elected new members of the Supreme Court who, unlike the prior Supreme Court, said, oh, no, you can't do that. And they threw out those maps and they instituted fairer maps. In the state of North Carolina, the opposite thing happened. The Republican supermajority passed a very Republican-favored map. In fact, as evidence showed at a particular trial, it was designed specifically to dilute the votes of the black population of North Carolina. The state Supreme Court said, no, you can't do it. It's not democracy. Every one person, one vote. Everybody should be able to vote, for the candidate of their choice. It shouldn't be predetermined by politicians drawing maps. So then there was a Supreme Court election in North Carolina, which took 2 seats away from liberal. It's nonpartisan. Yes, fine. From the Democratic candidates and gave it to the Republicans. And what do you know? The new Republican majority in North Carolina said, actually, now that we think about it, it turns out those maps are fine. So generally speaking, both sides do it. There's very little things you can do about it because the Supreme Court won't intervene. And so the state Supreme Courts tend now to be just as partisan as the state legislature. So, for example, in Texas, the chances of the state Supreme Court, which is all appointed by Republican governors, the chances of them intervening in this to say, oh, no, you can't do it, are minimal. Because, to go back to my original point, it's not a law that you have to do it just once every 10 years. It's just the way it's always been done because that's fair. If you don't care about being fair, you can do what you want.
Thank you for indulging my digression. I appreciate
That's
that. Okay. Kathy, we're going to get back to your question. Specifically, does the Electoral College still serve us well today?
No, not at all. Although for different reasons. People have known the Electoral College is messed up for a long, long time. There have been many, many, many attempts to amend the Constitution so as to eliminate it and go to a popular election of the president. Because, as I said, he's the only office holder that is not elected through popular majority. In fact, in the 1960s, in the late 1960s, Indiana Senator Birch Bayh came so incredibly close to getting rid of the Electoral College. He convinced the House of Representatives to pass an amendment, and they did by the I think it's the 3/4 majority necessary to pass an amendment, but it was filibustered in the Senate by Southern segregationists. Even after the passage of the Voting Rights Act in the mid-60s in 65, Southern senators knew that is very hard for Black people to vote in their states, and thus they wanted the power. They would rather have the power of the Electoral College than have to open up the vote to their actual population. These days, the problem with the Electoral College is very different. And it's really simple to describe in that it makes the vast majority of voters in America completely irrelevant, utterly irrelevant. I live in Illinois. Illinois is a blue state, as we say now. Sure, I can vote for the Democrat if I want. It's not going to make any difference. The Democrat electors are going to win in the state of Illinois. But it's really frustrating for Republicans in Illinois because they don't matter at all. It doesn't care. Nobody cares what they want because they don't have any influence in a presidential election. The same is true with Republicans in California, or Democrats in Texas, or Democrats in South Carolina, increasingly in Florida, or Republicans in New York State, or in Republicans in Vermont, in the classic blue states. None of their votes matter. And what that means is none of their concerns matter, unless they're rich, right? Donors will always have a voice. But for the vast majority of, to use this example, Republican voters in California, whatever they prefer doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. They're essentially disenfranchised. If you are a Republican living in California, your vote for president does not matter. If you are a Democrat living in Texas, your vote for president does not matter. And that's bad, but it has a distorting effect on presidential politics. Obviously, it means that the focus of the presidential campaigns is always going to be on those swing states, those very few states where, by virtue of a balance of populations, they could go either way, thus swinging. Your Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina to a certain extent, Nevada, Arizona. Those are the ones that so all of the attention is given to those states. And if you talk to anybody who lives in, say, Pennsylvania during a presidential campaign, they will tell you how incredibly annoying it is that they're constantly deluged by everything, by ads and appearances. And that's good for Pennsylvania, I guess, but why shouldn't the people of New York State, which is right next door, get attention? But it also means that I think our politics get really distorted. Assume for a minute that Democrats in Texas, because of their cultural heritage and everything else, are slightly more conservative than Democrats nationally. Assume, for the same argument, that Republicans in California, for the same reasons, they live in California, are more liberal in general than Republicans nationwide. Because those people are written out of the presidential elections entirely, that potentially moderating influence has no effect, right? You could have that sort of more mainstream politics that everybody demands that we need if you simply empowered the people who live in solid blue or solid red states, all of them, to vote. We would have truly national elections for our national office, and everybody would be empowered. And you have no idea what would happen. We've never had an election without the Electoral College. We don't know what it would look like if Republicans in California knew their vote would count, or Democrats in Texas, or Democrats in the Deep South. We don't know what they would do if they knew their vote counted. I mean, for example, the conventional wisdom of the 2024 election is that Kamala Harris lost because so many Democrats stayed home. Okay, let's assume that's true. Would they have stayed home? Would they have stayed home if they knew that their vote actually counted? We'll never know. And we should know. I think that the popular vote for a president and vice president in this country would moderate our politics and would make our choice of president far more reflective of the nation as a whole than it has been ever.
Are there any pros? So you laid out the cons for the Electoral College. You laid out the pros for popular vote. Are there any pros you can think of right now that the Electoral College still has going in its favor?
Well, the one you'll hear is that it gives the small states disproportionate power, right? I mean, it makes sure that they're not run roughshod over. And that, to a certain extent, is true. It's also true in their representation of Congress. As I'm sure you've heard, Wyoming, which has a smaller population than Los Angeles County, maybe even the city of Los Angeles, I haven't checked recently, has 2 senators. That seems unfair to me anyway, but there's nothing we can do about that. The Senate is here to stay. But I think that the small state argument falls apart when you realize, again, Wyoming gets a disproportionate say because of the Electoral College. Their electoral votes are a higher proportion of the total electoral votes than their population is a proportion of the national population. So they get a lift. But at the same time, the entire, all the Democrats in Wyoming or Montana, they're completely irrelevant. So sure, you'd lose that sort of boost of influence you get in Wyoming or Montana, but you'd also get some. You'd all of a sudden, the people of Missoula, for example, which is a pretty liberal place, would be able to have some small influence in a presidential election, at least as much as their neighbors. And that, to me, from the perspective of Montana, say, should carry a lot of weight, unless, of course, you are a rock-rib Republican and you don't want the Democrats in Montana to have any influence. So I think just in terms of fairness, the idea of empowering every individual vastly outweighs this notion of small states being run roughshod over.
It's unlikely that we'll go to a popular vote, right? 17 states have national popular vote legislation that's become law.
Right.
And that reflects 209 electoral votes. So these are mostly blue states.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and just to explain to your listeners, this is something that once Birch Bayh's amendment failed, he signed up for the National Popular Vote Compact. And remember, I said, under the design of the Constitution, any state can choose electoral votes any way they want, right? You can have the legislature do it, you can draw lots, whatever you want. Most states do it by whatever slate wins the popular vote in your state. The National Popular Vote Compact is an idea where states agree that their electoral votes go to the winner of the national popular vote, whatever their state did. So, again, to take an example that's extremely unlikely, if Wyoming were to sign up to this, and in a presidential election, Wyoming goes 80% for the Republican, but the national vote goes to the Democrat, then Wyoming would assign its electors to the Democratic candidate, or would technically select the electors who were pledged to the Democratic candidate. That's a good idea. I mean, it's a way to doing an end run around the requirements for a constitutional amendment, the only other way to do it. There are a lot of unanswered questions, even if this did work. I mean, all of a sudden, the popular vote becomes really important because it's going to decide the president. But we're still going to be dealing with a system of states controlling their own elections. We go back to that first problem that they thought the Electoral College would solve, which is that how do you make sure that Pennsylvania doesn't goose its vote to get more popular votes for the president? Well, you just tell them they can do whatever they want, but they only get however many electoral votes. So all of a sudden, we'd have a system where the individual popular votes directly elected the president, right? Individual states, I mean, but we'd have a state-by-state system of counting those votes, state-by-state laws. And as we know, sadly, to this day, voting is not a constitutional right. It can be diminished. It can be taken away. In the Fifth Amendment, you can take away somebody's right to vote if they commit a felony. I'm sorry, that's not the fifth, the 15th. So the problem is, again, it would raise all these other questions that a constitutional amendment would by its nature have to solve and to be passed. But I would say probably if you were to, let me put it this way. To institute a national popular vote through the compact would require the kind of national cooperation and willingness to give up immediate advantage for the long-term health of the nation that we just haven't seen in this country for a very long time. So
we can't do it in small things. We can't do it in big things.
Yeah, and it's quite terrifying. And one of the things that's going on is, as I'm sure you know, is right now, the Republican Party, it wasn't always a Republican Party. It is now, used to be the Democratic Party way back when, is using the anti-majoritarian aspects of our Constitution, most especially the Senate and the Supreme Court's role, to basically rule as a minority in this country. That is, the things they're doing are not very popular, as polls tell us. Certainly, this last election, President Trump did in fact win the popular vote by a small margin, but nonetheless, they're using these mechanisms to impose a vision on the country that in its specifics is not particularly popular. And as we've also seen, and here again we return to the thing in Texas, they're also really intent on using the power they have to cement the power into the future, to make sure that their lack of support for their specific policy ideas doesn't prevent them from retaining the power to carry them out.
I asked this final question with the knowledge that as a historian, historians are terrible at predicting the future.
Yeah, that's why they're called historians, right? It's history.
Right,
it's history. Yeah.
Right. So, do you think the Electoral College is here to stay?
The only way it would go away is if, in one of two circumstances. One is that the party that at that moment had an advantage through its use, right now it's the Republican Party, it wasn't always, it was the Democratic Party within my lifetime. If that party agrees to give up that advantage, that's unlikely. The other possibility is that both sides decide that it's so bad that it just has to be done away with, which is what almost happened with Birch Bay's amendment because it came out of the election of 1968. In 1968, George Wallace came close to winning enough electoral votes, I can't remember the number exactly, so as to deprive the other two candidates, Nixon or Humphrey, of a majority. And if that had happened, one more state, maybe two more, depending, the election would have gone to the House of Representatives. And that is something that's never happened. Well, sort of never happened. 1876 is a whole other thing. But,
John Quincy Adams.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. It has. You're right. It has happened before, but it hasn't happened in, say, modern America. And that was so horrifying. It was so horrifying to Birch Bay and a lot of other people that this Southern segregationist almost threw the election into the House of Representatives, that he was able to generate a tremendous amount of support for doing away with this system that almost led to that disastrous outcome until he was stopped by the other Southern segregationists. And so
this was also the plan, Peter. Yeah. This was also one of the plans mentioned by the Trump campaign.
How so?
To send it to because Kennedy propping up RFK, they could potentially throw it into the House, and of course the Republicans hold the legislatures. Each legislature gets a vote, and
right. And the way it works, if I'm not mistaken, is, and this was part of their plan in 2020, what I believe Peter Navarro called the Eastman's plan, and what Peter Navarro called the Green Bay sweep, is that if you could just disqualify enough electoral votes from certain swing states, you can create enough confusion that it would be thrown to the House of Representatives, and there every delegation gets a vote, not every member. So even though Democrats might have had a majority of members, they did not have a majority of delegations, and the majority of delegations would have elected, or rather re-elected, President Trump. Yeah, that's bad too. I guess that the problem is it's hard at this point to imagine a potential outcome like as what happened in 1968 that would be sufficiently horrifying to a bipartisan majority in this country that they would step in to prevent it from happening. That's the thing I don't see happening. And because of that, I don't know. I just wish that, again, and this is an accident of history and has nothing to do with their particular character at this moment, that the Republicans who believe that the Electoral College is to their advantage, and it is right now, I wish they would see that it would be even more to their advantage and their voters to do away with it because of what I said before, because of those disenfranchised Republicans. And there are so many of them. There were more voters for Trump in California this last election than there were in West Virginia. In California, where it didn't matter. Imagine if their votes mattered. If all of those people in Orange County or the Inland Empire or the northeastern counties of California, those Republican areas, if their vote counted, imagine how great that would be for those Republican voters. And the same thing would go for Democrats in other states. And you'd hope in a rational world that the Republican Party would see that. They'd respond to the pressure from those people, make sure our votes count, and press for that reform. But like a lot of very smart and useful ideas, I don't see that having a lot of life right now.
Producer James wants to end on a positive note.
Oh, please.
Is there anything hopeful you're seeing now about anything, even non-politics?
Gosh, geez, it's a tough question. And, everybody returns to small things. My kids are doing great. But in terms of national politics, I do think that, as is often the case in any crisis, people are being awakened to the reality that they face in terms of the country that they want, the country that they have, and the country that we are rapidly becoming unless something changes. To quote Barack Obama, we are the change that we're looking for. To quote somebody else, there ain't nobody coming to save us. And I do think that people see that and know it. And I think that the internet is far less the blessing than we all thought it would be when they first thought of it. But at the same time, it's allowing people to understand what's happening across the country in a way that is inspiring a lot of people, and on both sides, to take action. People are responding. I mean, one of the things that I have said as I've gone around the country and talked about the Constitution and democracy, which in general I'm a big fan of both, is that as long as you have democracy, and it's a vibrant, effective democracy, i.e. it actually works, you vote and the winner of the vote gets to hold power for the limited period of time that they have, and the other side respects that victory, which used to be the norm. As long as you have democracy, there's nothing that you can't fix. There's no other problem that you can't fix. If the government has gone really wrong in a direction A, democracy, if required, will provide the corrective. If the government is doing something that the majority of these people dislike, then the majority of people will fix it. And that's the only hope. And as long as that's possible, hope remains.
I've been talking to Peter Sagal, host of NPR's Wait, Don't Tell Me, a fellow historian as well. Check out his PBS show from a few years back, Constitution USA. It's got the Constitution and Harley Davidsons. What else do you need? Peter, it's such a treat to have you on American History Hotline today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I always love talking about this stuff. And, everybody get out there and vote. Everybody get involved. Everybody make your feelings known. Everybody make your opinion known. That's your obligation as a citizen.
You've been listening to American History Hotline, a production of iHeart Podcasts and Scratch Track Productions. The show's executive producer is James Morrison. Our executive producers from iHeart are Jordan Runtall and Jason English. Original music composed by me, Bob Crawford. Please keep in touch. Our email is americanhistoryhotline@gmail.com. If you like the show, please tell your friends and leave us a review in Apple Podcasts. I'm your host, Bob Crawford. Feel free to hit me up on social media to ask a history question or to let me know what you think of the show. You can find me at Bob Crawford Base. Thanks so much for listening. See you next week.
What's up, fam? It's sports journalist Ari Chambers.
Hey, what's up, y'all? It's your girl, Sam J.
And we're the hosts of Everyone Watches Women's Sports, a new podcast from Together.
We're breaking down the biggest headlines, the viral moments, and the stories everyone's talking about across women's sports.
From game-changing performances to culture-shifting conversations, we'll give you our takes, our debates, and a few laughs along the way.
Because everyone watches women's sports. Listen to Everyone Watches Women's Sports
on the iHeartRadio app,
Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Joy is essential and it's also elusive. But now, there's a new and exciting way to start your journey toward a more joyful existence. Joy 101. It's a new podcast hosted by me, Hoda Kotb. If you're craving inspiration to maximize your joy, tune into these candid, uplifting, and moving on-air chats. Open your free iHeartRadio app, search Joy 101, and listen now. Joy 101 with Hoda Kotb is presented by CVS.
My first guest is Paris Hilton, Shakira, Luke, and Yerin. Have surprises?
Many surprises.
Welcome to the Sweet 305 podcast, where the group chat comes to life.
What up? You're the only person I know that loves a yellow Starburst. It's lemonade.
This is Sweet 305. Here, oversharing is encouraged. Listen to Sweet 305 with Lele Pons on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey everyone, it's the Jonas Brothers. This week on the podcast, Hey Jonas, we're hanging out with Michael Bublé. After Kevin's recent interesting confession about Michael, we figured there's only one thing to do. We must invite Michael Bublé on the podcast, and we want to know what's on his Sexy Time playlist.
You know, I did an interview, and they're like, have you heard about this Jonas Brothers thing? And they were like, what did you think of it? And I was like, well, I mean, it's reciprocal.
We talk about Kevin's confession, Michael's reaction, and a whole lot more. Our conversation with Michael Bublé is out now. Listen to Hey Jonas on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.